Can you believe it? Jake woke up to the chaotic clanging of metal and a cacophony of loud voices right outside his window. His groggy mind first assumed the garbage truck had rolled in way too early, but as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and peeked through the blinds, his heart practically stopped in his chest. His backyard, his pride and joy, that meticulously maintained, lush, green sanctuary of private property had been utterly invaded. Rows of white folding chairs were lined up like soldiers. A floral decorated arch stood tall and proud at the far end, and a bustling team of decorators scurried about, setting up what could only be described as an extravagant wedding ceremony. What on earth was happening? Jake blinked hard, half convinced he was trapped in some bizarre dream. But no, this was real. This was actually happening. And then, oh boy, he spotted her, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, standing smack in the middle of his yard like she owned every blade of grass. She was barking orders with the confidence of a dictator, completely at ease in her audacity. Fury surged through Jake's veins. He threw on a hoodie, stormed out the back door, and marched right up to her, his voice slicing through the chatter of the workers like a knife. Karen, what the hell is going on? Karen turned to him, flashing that infuriating, smug smile that could make anyone's blood boil. Oh, Jake, you're finally up. We were starting to worry you'd sleep through the whole thing. She chirped, as if this were all perfectly normal. Jake's jaw clenched. The whole what? This is my yard. Why is there a wedding set up here? He demanded, his voice trembling with disbelief. Karen laughed, waving a dismissive hand like he was overreacting. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Jake. It's just for the day my daughter's wedding, remember? His eye twitched. Remember? No, I don't remember. Because no one ever asked me. He shot back, his frustration bubbling over. Karen sighed, her tone dripping with condescension, as if he were a toddler throwing a tantrum. Jake, we sent out notices weeks ago. This is a community event. You should feel honored to be chosen for such an important day. Honored? Jake's blood pressure spiked as he scanned his yard again, taking in the surreal scene. A DJ was setting up massive speakers right by his fence. A catering van had the nerve to park in his driveway, and good Lord, was that a portable bathroom being wheeled into his front yard? Was this woman serious? I don't care what notices you claim you sent. I never agreed to this. Get this stuff out of my yard now! Jake's voice was firm, his patience hanging by a thread. But Karen's expression hardened, that fake smile melting into something far more menacing. Oh, Jake, you're making this so difficult. Do you really want to be the only person in the neighborhood who ruins my daughter's special day? She said, her voice laced with venom. Jake clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. I don't give a damn about your daughter's special day. This is trespassing. You have no right. Karen raised a hand, cutting him off with a flourish. Oh, but I do, she declared triumphantly. According to HOA regulations, community events can be hosted in any available space deemed suitable by the board. And guess what, Jake? We deemed your yard suitable. Jake's stomach twisted into knots. He knew Karen and her posse of HOA loyalists had been concocting ridiculous rules for years, but this was a whole new level of insanity. You can't just, he started, but Karen interrupted, her voice sickeningly sweet. Oh, but we can. And unless you'd like to rack up some rather hefty fines for, let's see, an unsightly lawn, unauthorized external modifications, and oh, maybe some parking violations. Jake's jaw tightened so much he thought his teeth might crack. She was threatening him. Karen had already decided this was happening, and those so-called fines were just her twisted way of strong-arming him into submission. How dare she? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed a plan. The wedding was barreling toward him in less than 6 hours, and his yard was already halfway transformed into a full-blown venue. Caterers were unloading trays of fancy food. The florist was draping vibrant flowers over every surface, and a gaggle of giddy bridesmaids were snapping selfies by his beloved koi pond, giggling like they hadn't a care in the world. Jake stormed back into his house, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. His brain was on fire, racing with outrage and ideas. There had to be a way to turn this around. If Karen wanted a war, oh, she was going to get one. He grabbed his phone, his mind whirling through options. Call the police? No, Karen was too cunning for that. She'd wrap this whole fiasco in enough bogus HOA red tape to make it look legitimate. He needed something faster, something that would derail this wedding before it could even start. Then, as he stared out the window at the pristine white tablecloths fluttering in the breeze and the delicate floral arrangements sparkling in the sunlight, a wicked, brilliant idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. His property had an old underground sprinkler system, one he never used because the water it pumped out was absolutely vile, rusty, murky, and reeking of iron and dirt. It was a leftover from the old plumbing system, replaced years ago, but those ancient pipes were still there, lying in wait. A slow, mischievous grin spread across Jake's face. Karen wanted a wedding in his yard? Fine, she'd get exactly what she asked for, and then some. He wasted no time, his heart pounding with a mix of rage and excitement. He marched to the garage, yanked out his trusty toolbox, and got to work. If everything went according to plan, this wedding was about to become the most spectacular disaster this neighborhood had ever witnessed. Jake paced his kitchen, gripping his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles ached, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to sanity. He'd spent years putting up with Karen's nonsense, her HOA minions, and their endless petty power trips. But this? Turning his backyard into a wedding venue without so much as a courtesy call? This was beyond insanity! The worst part? Karen knew exactly how to manipulate the system to get away with it, weaving her web of fake rules and threats to ensure no one dared challenge her. But not today, Karen, not today. He had to be smart about this, had to strike back in a way that would ensure she'd never pull a stunt like this again. The sound of laughter drifting in from outside made his blood boil hotter than ever. He peeked through the blinds, his eyes narrowing as he watched a group of bridesmaids posing in front of the floral arch by his fence, their dresses fluttering in the breeze. A few of them even had the gall to wave at him, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd never agreed to any of this. The caterers were setting up tables, arranging gleaming, expensive-looking dinnerware, while the DJ tested the sound system near his porch, blasting music that grated on Jake's nerves. His yard looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a bridal magazine, and yet he was the only one in this whole chaotic equation who hadn't been consulted. How could they be so clueless? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was Tom, one of the few decent folks in the neighborhood. Jake. Tom sighed as soon as he picked up. I heard about what's happening, man. I don't even know what to say. Jake's voice was sharp, his patience long gone. You could start by telling me how Karen thinks she can get away with this, Tom. Tom hesitated, his voice low. Look, you know how she is. She's twisted the HOA rules just enough to make it seem like she's within her rights. She bullied the board into approving this, and if you try to fight it, she'll probably bury you under so many fake violations, you won't know which way is up. Jake rubbed his temples, a headache forming from the sheer audacity of it all. He already knew Karen's tactics, but hearing it out loud made it sting even more. Then I need to do something she can't argue with, something legal, but something that'll ruin this whole thing. There was a pause on the other end, and then Tom's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. You didn't hear this from me, okay? But I found out something juicy. Karen didn't just pick your yard because it's pretty. She chose it because she blew the HOA's event fund on herself. There was supposed to be a real venue, but she spent the budget on personal expenses, so she cooked up this HOA nonsense to force you into hosting. Jake's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles whitening. Of course she did! The sheer entitlement was staggering, but this revelation gave him a new angle. Karen wasn't just playing tyrant, she was covering up her own shady mistakes. Thanks for the tip, Tom, Jake muttered, his mind already racing. Now I just need to make sure this wedding crashes and burns. He hung up and turned back to the window, his gaze locking onto the sprinkler system controls in the garage. That nasty, stagnant water had been festering in those underground pipes for years. One flick of a switch, and his yard would transform into a swamp of rusty, muddy chaos. But timing was everything. If he acted too soon, Karen might find a way to salvage her precious event. No, he had to wait for the perfect moment when the guests were seated. The setup was flawless, and the bride was just about to make her grand entrance. He needed to make this a disaster Karen would never forget. As he plotted, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a man in a sharp tuxedo, looking nervous as all get out. Hey, you must be Jake, the man said, shifting uncomfortably. I'm David. I'm the groom. Jake's eyes narrowed. You're the guy marrying Karen's daughter? David scratched the back of his head, clearly embarrassed. Yeah, look, I just wanted to say I had no idea she was pulling this stunt. I thought we had a real venue booked. I only found out this morning that this is someone's private property. Jake studied him for a moment, searching for any hint of deception. The guy seemed genuine, caught in Karen's whirlwind of control. So you're saying Karen lied to everyone? Jake asked, his tone skeptical. David let out a heavy exhale. I'm saying I wouldn't put it past her. She's been micromanaging every detail of this wedding. Stephanie, my fiancée, wanted something small and simple, but Karen turned it into this circus. And now here I am, standing in a stranger's doorway, apologizing for something I didn't even do. Jake crossed his arms, his frustration simmering. You realize you're about to marry into this mess, right? David gave a dry, humorless laugh. Trust me, I've been having second thoughts. This whole thing is giving me whiplash. He ran a hand down his face, his exhaustion palpable. I just wanted to say, I get why you're mad, Jake. If I were you, I'd be losing my mind. Jake sighed, a tiny sliver of sympathy creeping in despite his anger. As much as he wanted to hate everyone involved, David seemed like a decent guy stuck in a bad situation. Well, you're not wrong, Jake admitted. He glanced past David, spotting Karen across the yard, directing vendors like a general commanding an army. His blood boiled all over again. Look, man, I appreciate you coming over, but this wedding is a complete sham, and I'm not just going to sit here and let her trample all over me. David nodded, his expression resigned. Fair enough. Whatever you're planning, maybe don't destroy the whole wedding. Stephanie doesn't deserve that. Jake considered it for a split second, then shrugged. No promises, pal. David sighed, clearly expecting that answer, but he didn't argue. He gave Jake a weary nod and trudged back toward the chaos, looking like a man walking to his doom. Jake shut the door, his mind racing. 2 hours until the ceremony started, plenty of time to fine-tune his plan. He grabbed his toolbox and headed to the garage, double-checking the sprinkler system with a gleam in his eye. He wasn't going to unleash the chaos just yet. No way. He was going to let Karen think she'd won, let her bask in her smug victory. Then, right when she thought everything was perfect, he'd flip that switch and turn her dream wedding into the neighborhood's worst nightmare. Oh, this was going to be epic. Jake slammed the door shut, his heart racing with a mix of fury and anticipation. Can you believe it? He checked the time 2 hours until this absurd wedding ceremony was set to begin. That was just enough time to fine-tune his diabolical plan. He grabbed his trusty toolbox and stormed out to the garage, his mind buzzing with the chaos. he was about to unleash. Was he really going to do this? Oh, absolutely. He wasn't going to flood the yard just yet, no way. He was going to bide his time, let Karen and her entourage think everything was picture perfect. Then, right when that smug Karen thought she'd triumphed, he'd make sure this wedding became the most catastrophic event in HOA history. How dare she think she could take over his property like this? The sun was blazing, casting a golden glow over the scene as guests started trickling in, completely unaware of the storm brewing. The wedding was coming together exactly as Karen had dreamed well, except for one tiny critical detail. The man who actually owned the yard was plotting from his window, waiting for the perfect moment to turn her fairy tale event into an unforgettable nightmare. Jake sipped his coffee, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He'd checked everything twice, no, 3 times. The rusted sprinkler system was primed. The foul water lurking in those ancient underground pipes was ready to erupt. And the second Karen thought she was ruling the world, he'd flip that switch and let chaos reign. Oh, this was going to be glorious. Outside, the air was filled with laughter and chatter, a deceptive calm before the storm. The groom's side of the family was seated, exchanging polite small talk, blissfully ignorant of the disaster about to crash down on them. But the bride's side? Oh, they were a whole different story. Loud, obnoxious, and oozing entitlement, almost as bad as Karen herself, they strutted around like they owned the place. A group of middle-aged women in ridiculously expensive dresses whined about the humidity, fanning themselves with dramatic flair as if they were starring in a soap opera. And the kids? Don't even get Jake started. A few of them were running wild, completely unchecked, stomping through his meticulously tended flower beds, while their parents did nothing. Nothing! Who lets their kids ruin someone else's garden like that? Jake's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white when he spotted Karen at the front of the yard, playing the part of a gracious queen hosting a royal gala. She was all smiles, laughing and greeting guests as if she owned not just his yard but the entire neighborhood. The audacity! She didn't even glance at Jake's house, so confident that she'd crushed him into submission. It was almost laughable how easily she thought she could get away with this. Almost. The music kicked in, a soft, romantic tune drifting from the DJ's setup near the fence, signaling the start of the procession. The bridesmaids began their slow march down the makeshift aisle, each one tiptoeing carefully to avoid the uneven patches in the grass. The audience watched, their faces glowing with warm, sentimental smiles. Everything was going perfectly, too perfectly. Jake's hand hovered over the sprinkler switch, his pulse racing. Not yet! He had to time this just right, didn't he? Karen stood near the front, practically glowing with pride, her chest puffed out like she'd just won the lottery. Her daughter, Stephanie, was moments away from her grand entrance. The guests rose to their feet, craning their necks in anticipation. The music swelled, building to a dramatic crescendo. This was it, the moment Karen had been waiting for. Jake's lips curled into a sly grin. Here we go. He flicked the switch. It started with a faint, almost innocent gurgle, so quiet no one even noticed. But then bam, with a sudden violent hiss, the underground pipes unleashed years of trapped stagnant water. The sprinklers roared to life, spewing dark, murky sludge in every direction like a scene from a horror movie. The first few rows of guests were drenched instantly, their horrified shrieks piercing the air as their fancy outfits were soaked in brown, foul-smelling gunk. The water gushed in wild, erratic sprays, dousing the perfectly arranged chairs, soaking the pristine white tablecloths, and oh, the horror toppling the towering wedding cake into a soggy mess. Can you imagine the panic? Chaos exploded like a bomb. The DJ's speakers sparked and fizzled out as water splashed over the electrical equipment, sending the poor guy scrambling. The bridesmaids screamed bloody murder, clutching their ruined dresses as they stumbled through the flood of filth, their high heels sinking into the mud. Elderly guests staggered backward, slipping and sliding in the quickly forming quagmire, their faces twisted in shock. The once pristine white aisle was now a swampy disaster, and the carefully scattered flower petals, they were nothing but soggy clumps floating in the muck. And then, oh, the drama, the bride arrived. Stephanie stepped into the yard, her face beaming with dreams of her big moment, only to be met with absolute pandemonium. Her white dress, once a glowing vision of perfection, was ruined the second she stepped into a puddle of sludge. She let out a gut-wrenching shriek, frantically lifting the fabric, but it was hopeless. The bottom half of her gown was stained beyond salvation, the delicate lace dripping with rust-colored water. What a tragedy. Jake stood at his window, watching the madness unfold with a rush of pure, unfiltered satisfaction. But wait, the real show was just getting started. Karen's face transformed from blissful joy to utter horror, her mouth dropping open as her perfect world crumbled. She stormed toward the sprinkler system, her heels slipping on the wet grass, nearly sending her face first into the mud. She caught herself just in time, whipping around with a look of pure rage, her eyes scanning the yard until they locked onto Jake's house. Jake stepped onto his back porch, cool as a cucumber, crossing his arms as Karen stomped toward him, mud splattering her once pristine heels. "You did this!" she shrieked, her fingers shaking as she pointed at him, her voice dripping with venom. Jake shrugged, barely containing his smirk. "Oh, I don't know what you mean, Karen. Sounds like a plumbing issue to me. Maybe you should have picked a real venue instead of stealing my backyard." Karen's hands curled into fists, her face turning a shade of red that could rival a fire truck. "You ruined my daughter's wedding," she screamed, practically spitting with rage. Jake raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "Did I? Because last time I checked, you never had permission to use my yard in the first place, did you?" Stephanie, now teetering on the edge of tears, spun toward her mother, her voice trembling with betrayal. "Mom, what is he talking about? What's going on?" Karen stammered, her eyes darting to the guests, who were now whispering furiously among themselves. Some had whipped out their phones, eagerly recording the unfolding scandal, their cameras capturing every second of the chaos. Jake's smirk widened. "Oh, you didn't tell them, Karen? You didn't tell your own daughter that this wasn't a real venue? That you couldn't be bothered to book a proper place because you blew the HOA money on yourself?" The crowd gasped, a collective shock rippling through the soggy gathering. Karen's face drained of color, her smug confidence evaporating like mist. Stephanie's expression morphed from heartbreak to white-hot fury. "You told me everything was taken care of," she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "You said we had a beautiful outdoor venue booked. How could you lie to me?" Karen floundered, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Sweetie, I meant to. You lied to me." Stephanie's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "You used someone's private property without even asking him. How could you do this?" By now, the groom's family was slowly backing away from the bride's side, their faces twisted with disgust and disbelief. David, the groom, stepped forward, shaking his head in stunned resignation. "Wow, this just keeps getting worse, doesn't it?" He turned to Stephanie, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You knew your mom was controlling, but this is beyond insane." Stephanie's lip quivered, her eyes wide with desperation. "I didn't know, David. I swear I didn't know." David exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a migraine. "I need to think. I need a second to process this madness." He turned and walked off, leaving Stephanie standing alone, her ruined dress clinging to her legs like a soggy reminder of her shattered dreams. Karen, watching her carefully orchestrated events spiral out of control, tried desperately to regain command. "All right, everyone, calm down," she shouted, her voice shrill. "We can fix this. We'll just move the wedding inside." Jake let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Inside? You mean into my house? That's adorable, Karen. Get off my property before I call the cops. Karen's eyes blazed with rage, but she was cornered and she knew it. She turned, frantically trying to salvage what little was left of her daughter's big day, but it was futile. The guests were already fleeing, murmuring among themselves about what an unmitigated disaster this was. Jake watched with a deep, satisfying sense of triumph as the wedding imploded before Karen's eyes. The expensive decor was ruined, the guests were furious, and best of all, her dirty secret about the HOA funds was now out in the open for all to see. As the last stragglers trudged away, Karen shot Jake one final venomous glare. "You'll pay for this, Jake," she hissed. Jake just smiled, cool and collected. "I think you've already paid plenty, Karen." With that, he turned and sauntered back into his house, leaving Karen standing in the muddy wreckage of what was supposed to be her perfect, flawless day. Karen stood frozen in the middle of Jake's backyard, her once immaculate dress now splattered with mud, her hair frizzing wildly from the damp air. The wedding guests had mostly scattered, some helping each other to their cars, others too busy gossiping about the scandalous spectacle they'd just witnessed. The lavish decorations, the vibrant flowers, the elegant white chairs, everything was soaked, stained, or sinking into the filthy mess of water and mud that now covered the lawn. The wedding cake? Oh, it was a tragedy. It had collapsed under the deluge, its intricate design reduced to a pathetic, melted pile of sugar and regret. Can you even imagine the baker's heartbreak? Jake leaned against his back porch railing, savoring every second of Karen's downfall. She was frantically barking orders at the few remaining vendors, but no one was listening, not anymore. The florists were packing up what little they could salvage. The DJ was shaking his head at his fried equipment, and the caterers were bickering loudly over who was to blame for this colossal disaster. Stephanie, still standing in her destroyed wedding dress, was trembling with rage. Her mascara had smeared into dark streaks down her face. Her hair was a frizzy mess from the sudden soaking, and her once gorgeous gown was utterly ruined. She glared at her mother, her voice cracking with raw emotion as she demanded answers. "You lied to me, Mom. You told me everything was planned, that we had a proper venue. You said it was all taken care of. How could you betray me like this?" Karen turned to her daughter, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace, as if she could will this nightmare away with sheer stubbornness. "Sweetie, we can still fix this." "No, Mom, we can't," Stephanie snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "The wedding is over. It's ruined, and it's all because you couldn't just do things the right way." David, the groom, had been quiet through most of the chaos, but now he stepped forward, his face a mask of weary disbelief. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to make sense of the madness. Stephanie, the first tried to ignore the red flags, your mom controlling every detail, treating people like they were her servants, the way you always made excuses for her. But this? He gestured to the swampy wreckage that was once Jake's backyard. "This is insane. I can't do this anymore." Stephanie's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you saying, David?" she whispered, her voice trembling. David sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I'm saying this isn't just a wedding disaster. This is a preview of what my life would be like, constantly cleaning up after your mom's messes." "I don't want that," Stephanie gasped, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're breaking up with me? At our wedding?" David ran a hand through his wet hair, looking utterly defeated. "What wedding, Stephanie? There's nothing left. And honestly, I think this is a sign. I can't marry into this family." The remaining crowd let out a collective gasp, and Karen's face turned as pale as a ghost. "David, you don't mean that," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "This is just the stress talking." "We can fix this." David shook his head, resolute. "No, Karen, we both know this isn't just about today. I'm done." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Stephanie frozen in place. her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process the devastation of her shattered dreams. Oh, can you imagine the tension in the air? Tom, the only halfway decent HOA member Jake had ever met, stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck with a nervous grimace. Look, Karen, we need to talk right now, he said, his voice firm despite the awkwardness. Karen whipped around, her patience fraying like a worn-out rope. Not now, Tom, she snapped, her eyes flashing with irritation. But Tom wasn't backing down, not today. Yeah, actually, now, he insisted, planting his feet. I got a call earlier from some of the other HOA members, and word spreading like wildfire. Seems you didn't have permission to pull off this whole fiasco, did you? And there's serious talk that you misused HOA funds for your own personal expenses. Is that true, Karen? Her face twisted into a mask of outrage, her lips curling in denial. Of course not. That's utterly ridiculous, she spat, but her voice wavered just enough to betray her. Tom crossed his arms, his gaze steady. Because if it is, Karen, you're looking at some major consequences: fraud, misappropriation of funds, maybe even legal action. And after this disaster, do you really think anyone's going to stick by you when it's time to vote you out? Jake smirked from his porch, his heart doing a little victory dance as he watched Karen squirm like a fish on a hook. She was used to controlling the narrative, twisting rules to suit her whims. But this time, she was trapped, and she knew it. She'd humiliated herself in front of everyone she'd tried to impress. Her daughter was beyond furious. The wedding was a catastrophic mess, and now the very people who once followed her blindly were turning on her like a pack of wolves. Karen let out a sharp, humorless laugh, her voice dripping with desperation. Oh, come on, Tom, don't be so dramatic. It was just a simple misunderstanding. The HOA funds are perfectly fine. Tom raised an eyebrow, his skepticism practically radiating. Then I guess you wouldn't mind if we did a full audit, would you? Karen's face twitched, a flicker of panic betraying her composure. That won't be necessary, she said quickly, too quickly. Tom's voice was slow and deliberate. Yeah, I think it is, Karen. The whispers among the dwindling crowd grew louder, a buzzing hive of gossip and judgment. Karen's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing into slits as she spun toward Jake, venom practically dripping from her glare. This is all your fault, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. Jake laughed a full, hearty laugh that echoed across the muddy wreckage of his yard. Oh no, Karen, this is all you. You brought this on yourself, didn't you? Karen took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, her hand smoothing her mud-splattered dress as if that could salvage her dignity. You think you've won, don't you, Jake? She said, her voice low and menacing. Jake shrugged, utterly unfazed. I think I'm finally getting my yard back, and I think you're about to have a whole lot more to worry about than little old me. Just then, as if on cue, the wail of a siren cut through the air. A police car rolled up, its lights flashing ominously, just as the last straggling guests were making their escape. One of the vendors must have called them about the unpaid bills. Talk about perfect timing. Jake watched with barely concealed amusement as Karen's expression flickered from fiery anger to sheer, unadulterated panic. Stephanie, meanwhile, had finally stopped crying, her mascara-streaked face a portrait of defeat. Her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had crushed her. I can't believe this, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake almost felt a pang of sympathy for her. But then he remembered how she'd stood by for years, letting her mother trample over everyone's boundaries without so much as a peep. Nope, no pity here. Karen stiffened like a deer in headlights as the officers approached, their boots crunching on the gravel. Good evening, officers, she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. I don't know what this is about, but I assure you, one of the officers held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. We've received reports of an unauthorized event on private property and possible fraudulent use of HOA funds. We need to ask you a few questions. Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut, her eyes wide with shock. For the first time in her life, the queen of control was utterly speechless. Jake grinned so wide his cheeks hurt. This was better than he could have ever dreamed. Tom sidled over to Jake, shaking his head with a low, disbelieving chuckle. "Man, I gotta say, that was something else," he said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Jake sighed, glancing at the muddy disaster that was once his pristine yard. "Yeah, well, I'm gonna be cleaning up this mess for weeks, aren't I?" Tom clapped him on the shoulder, his grin infectious. "Hey, at least you won, man." Jake's smirk returned, a spark of pride in his chest. Yeah, I did, didn't I?" Karen, now red-faced and flustered, was led toward the police car, her voice sharp and defensive as she tried to argue her way out. But no one was listening anymore, not the officers, not the vendors, not even the few lingering guests. Everyone was done with her. The wedding was in ruins. The HOA was turning against her, and her carefully constructed empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Jake leaned against his porch railing, watching with a deep, satisfying sense of victory as Karen's world fell apart before her very eyes. This was the best day ever. Could it get any better? The next morning, Jake stood in his backyard, coffee mug in hand, surveying the aftermath of the greatest disaster in neighborhood history. The muddy water had mostly dried, leaving behind ugly patches of brown stains on what used to be his lush green grass. Ruined decorations were scattered everywhere, soggy ribbons, shattered glassware, and a few pathetic wilted flowers still clinging to the wedding arch, which now leaned at a sad, drunken angle like a relic from a war zone. Broken plates and soggy napkins littered the ground, pitiful remnants of a celebration that never even got off the ground. The wedding was over, the HOA was in chaos. And Karen? Oh, she was nowhere to be seen. Had she finally fled the scene of her crimes? Jake sipped his coffee, savoring the sweet silence that enveloped the neighborhood. For the first time in years, there was no HOA threat looming over him like a dark cloud. No Karen sneering from across the street with her clipboard of doom. No ridiculous fines clogging up his mailbox. The wedding hadn't just exposed Karen's corruption. It had lit a fire under the entire neighborhood, giving everyone the push they needed to finally stand up to her. Nobody had an ounce of sympathy for her after the spectacle she'd caused. And with the police sniffing around, it was crystal clear that her reign of terror was officially over. Hallelujah. He chuckled to himself, replaying the moment Karen realized she was losing control. Oh, the look on her face. The way her smug grin had twisted into pure horror when that police car pulled up. The sheer panic in her voice as she tried to smooth talk her way out of a full-on fraud investigation. It was priceless. But there was no smoothing this over, was there? The other HOA board members were already scrambling to distance themselves, throwing Karen under the bus with loud claims that they had no idea she was misusing funds. Tom had promised Jake a full audit was coming, and from the sound of it, things were looking grim for the former queen. Could she really have thought she'd get away with it? And the cherry on top? The HOA had called an emergency meeting to discuss dissolving the whole darn thing. After years of enduring Karen's absurd rules and petty fines, the homeowners had finally had enough. With the scandal exploding and Karen's iron grip on the board shattered like cheap glass, people were waking up to the fact that they didn't need an HOA at all. The whole system had been nothing but Karen's personal tool for control, and now that she was out of the picture, it was only a matter of time before the entire thing collapsed. Freedom at last. Could Jake have asked for a better outcome? He strolled over to his fence, peering across the street at Karen's house. The curtains were drawn tight, the front yard eerily quiet, like a ghost town. Rumors were already swirling that she was planning to sell her house and skip town before the audit could nail her. Wouldn't that be just like her? Karen was many things: arrogant, manipulative, downright ruthless, but she wasn't the type to stick around and face the music, was she? Jake wouldn't be surprised if she was already packing her bags, plotting her escape from the consequences of her own making. As he turned back toward his house, a figure caught his eye in the driveway. David, the almost groom, stood there with his hands stuffed in his pockets, looking tired but oddly calm, like a man who just dodged a bullet. Jake nodded at him, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "Didn't think I'd see you back here, man." David gave a short, dry laugh. "Yeah, well, I needed some closure, I guess." He glanced around the wrecked yard, shaking his head in disbelief. "Man, this place got absolutely demolished, didn't it?" Jake smirked, leaning against the fence. "You should have seen it last night. The mosquitoes were throwing a party. I swear one of them carried off a bridesmaid." David snorted, a spark of amusement in his weary eyes. "Honestly, Jake, I don't know whether to thank you or be pissed at you. You ruined the wedding, but you might have saved my life." Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "So it's officially over, huh?" David nodded, his expression somber but resolute. "Stephanie called me this morning, but we both know it's not going to work. Last night was a wake-up call, man. Her mom's been controlling every part of her life, and if I had gone through with that wedding, I'd be stuck dealing with Karen forever. I don't think I could survive that kind of torture." Jake chuckled, picturing it. "Probably not. She'd have HOA rules for your marriage, section 5B. Husband must agree with wife's mother at all times or face a fine." David laughed, shaking his head, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Yeah, exactly. That's the nightmare I'm avoiding." He paused, then looked at Jake with a more serious expression. "I know you didn't do this for me, but thanks, man. You saved a lot of people from a living nightmare, didn't you?" Jake shrugged, playing it cool. "I just wanted my yard back. Everything else? Pure bonus." David nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "So what's next for Karen?" Jake's smirk returned, wicked and knowing. "Oh, she's done for. The HOA's falling apart, the board's turning on her, and the police are breathing down her neck. If she doesn't skip town, she's in for a world of trouble." David let out a long breath, relief washing over him. "Good. She deserves it, doesn't she?" He paused, then flashed Jake a grin. "So what's next for you, man? Gonna start renting out the yard for real weddings?" Jake laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet street. "Yeah, right! I've had enough of that for a lifetime." David clapped him on the shoulder, his grin widening. "Well, if you ever change your mind, charge him through the nose next time." Jake smirked as David walked off, shaking his head. As chaotic as the whole ordeal had been, it felt good knowing he wasn't the only one who'd come out on top. What a win! Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jake sat on his porch, soaking in the peaceful quiet of the neighborhood. It was almost surreal. After all the chaos, all the fighting, all the years of Karen making his life miserable with her petty rules and fines, it had all come crashing down in one glorious, muddy night. He'd spent so long dodging her nonsense, pushing back against her tyranny, and in the end, all it took was one over-the-top wedding and a little dirty water to bring her empire to its knees. Who could have predicted that? He leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs out, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in ages. Then his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. He glanced at the screen, a text from Tom. HOA meeting tomorrow. Final vote on disbanding. Should be a show. Bring popcorn. Jake grinned, shaking his head. Oh, he'd be there, front and center. After everything he'd been through, there was no way he was missing the final nail in Karen's coffin. As he set the phone down, movement across the street caught his eye. Karen's front door creaked open, and for the first time since her spectacular downfall, she stepped outside. She looked around cautiously, like a fugitive expecting an ambush, her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the fading light. She clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles white, and scurried to her car, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Jake watched, amused, as she slid inside and started the engine, her tires screeching slightly as she peeled out of the driveway and sped off into the dusk. Where was she going? He wasn't sure, but he had a sneaking suspicion it wasn't just a quick run to the grocery store. Was she finally running for good? Jake exhaled, leaning back in his chair, a contented smile spreading across his face. Maybe, just maybe, she was gone for good. He took another sip of his drink, gazing at the darkening sky, the stars just beginning to twinkle. Peace at last. At least, he thought with a chuckle, until the next neighborhood disaster decided to rear its head. But for now, this was his moment, and he was going to savor every second of it.